everyone, welcome to Briar Haus Writes. I'm Becky Parker, and today it is my honor to be able to have award-winning author known for her mystery novels, as well as being a naturalist, yoga instructor, and workshop coordinator, Miss Deborah Adams. Deborah, welcome to our program.
Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you for having me here.
Deborah, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, there's a lot to tell because, I'm an old lady now. But I actually, as far as writing, I started as a poet many, many years ago when I was in fifth grade.
Oh,
So my first published poem was in a local newspaper because the newspaper editor was also the school principal. From there, and I was a poet for many, many years, and then I decided I would write a mystery novel. And when you're working with dead bodies, poetry sort of falls to the wayside. So I did mysteries for many years, and then just took some time off from writing. I really didn't write at all for a few years. Picked it back up with creative nonfiction. And lately I have been doing more poetry and have just recently started doing some microfiction pieces.
what has captured your interest to write about? I know you write about mysteries and creative nonfiction, but what are you writing? What are your topics?
Um, there's a lot of nature involved. I have several essays that you can find online that begin with, I don't consider myself a nature writer,
Mhm.
but nature generally is a catalyst for a lot of the pieces that I write now, especially the creative nonfiction. For the microfiction that I've been writing, for the most part, is a series of small town witch stories, usually no more than 200 words, sometimes under 100.
Are they based in,
Are they
excuse me,
based on reality? Well,
yes.
yeah, they are inspired by some honest to goodness small town witches.
And is it witches in Tennessee or witches, in
Just
general?
wherever I run into them.
Deborah, tell me about when you have written mystery novels. What captures your attention when you are writing a mystery novel, and how do you get that plot from your thought process into the actual storyline and complete
Well,
it?
of course, everybody has their own likes and their own methods. For me, plotting is absolutely the hardest thing in the world to do. So while I will generally, in fact, start with a question. Oh, I wonder what would happen if da da da. And then in order to get a book out of it, I have to spend a whole lot of agonizing hours and days and weeks thinking about what would happen and how would I get from point A to point B to point C. I wish I could say, hey, everybody, here's how you do this, but it's just a lot of hard work.
Well, and how does research play into your stories?
That is something I love more than life itself. So I can research and research and research for as long as possible before I get down to the real business of writing what I've researched.
Have you ever thought about your characters as being real live people? I know some writers find them that they are as close as their own family members. How do you feel about your characters, and do you ever regret any of the actions that your characters do, like especially
Oh,
the naughty ones?
that's a good question. I love characters. Characters tend to write themselves for me, usually. So, and I think it often goes that way. If characters are easy for you, then plotting is not, and vice versa. I've had characters who have completely changed the story that I intended to tell. I'm one of I sound like one of those spacey woo-woo sort of writers when I say, well, the characters decide what's going to happen, but it's often true for me, at least. Uh, is there anything that they will? Yeah, there have been a few times when the characters got out ahead of me. There was, I wrote half a book and realized that the characters weren't pleased with me. And so I just had to scrap the entire thing and start over because one particular character wasn't going along with my program. My advice, if anybody wants to know, is listen to the characters. Let them do what they want. Don't fight it. They know better than you do.
Has there been any writers that have influenced your own particular style? And if
Oh,
so, why?
um, the first when I was a poet, hardcore poet, back in the early days, I read that sort of book. I read a lot of poetry. I read literary fiction. One day, on a day about like today, when we had storms and thunder and dark, gloomy skies, I was roaming around my local library and I saw a book called Curse of the Pharaoh. And I thought, oh, that's just what you need to read on a day like this when it's stormy and gloomy. It was written by Elizabeth Peters, and I took it home and read it. I was laughing so hard, my husband thought there was something wrong with me. It is a part of it. So it's most people watching this will know Elizabeth Peters is one of the pen names used by Barbara Mertz. She also writes as Barbara Michaels. Curse of the Pharaoh, I believe, is the second book in her series about Amelia Peabody, a Victorian era archaeologist. And it is absolutely imbued with Barbara's sense of humor, wicked, evil humor. When I read that and realized, oh my goodness, you can write mystery novels and be funny, I first started to think about writing a mystery novel.
And do you um ever wish that you could go back in time and maybe meet some of, meet Miss the writer?
Well, I did meet Barbara.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, in fact, she was absolutely delightful. And one of the joys of being a mystery writer is that, at least within the cozy mystery world, there's hard-boiled and police procedurals and all these different genres or subgenres. Um, but within the cozy mystery world, at least, people like Barbara Mertz, Mary Higgins Clark, Charlotte McLeod, so many of the great names
Hmm.
that people will be familiar with in that world are absolutely delightful human beings, or were. So many of them are gone now. But when I first met Barbara, and it was the first Malice Domestic, which is a cozy mystery conference. Anybody who was there, raise your hand. I also survived the first Malice Hotel. There was a get acquainted Friday night cocktail party, and so I was just roaming around. I'd not completed a novel yet. I don't think I'd started writing my first mystery novel, but I hadn't completed it. So I had no credibility at all. I was just another adoring fan. And I was shoulder to shoulder with people at this cocktail party. I turned around and there was Barbara Mertz, AKA Elizabeth Peters, standing literally touching my arm. And, being a really cool, sophisticated sort of person, I said, oh my God, it's you. I love your books. And she looked at my name tag and said, oh, Deborah, you came all the way from Tennessee. I said, well, yeah, how did you know that? And she said, who do you think answers the mail around here?
Oh,
She had been processing all the registration papers for this event and remembering who people were. And she was just an absolute joy to be around.
well, and I happen to know someone who did the very same thing at a recent conference. And I turned around and I met you. And you were working the event just like a regular Joe.
I,
I could
I was that, wasn't I?
you really were.
Just like a regular person. Yeah.
Like who in the world? Uh, who does that? Apparently famous authors do.
It's
Deborah,
it's so nice to have somebody in the world who will go along with my fantasy that I'm a famous author. Thank you for that.
Deborah, tell me, what is your ideal reader? What is that
People
person like?
who aren't offended by my sense of humor. That's helpful. And people who can recognize when I am being, or at least attempting to be funny. But pretty much anybody who likes what I write, who doesn't write me nasty letters, I appreciate that.
Well, Deborah, would you read some of your work for us?
Small Town Witch began with, sometimes I get titles first, and I had a title that popped into my head that I think is one of the ones that will be published maybe next month if it hasn't already. And from there, it was supposed to be a one-off. That was it. I was just going to write that little thing and I would be done. But it was so much fun, and I realized that so many of the people I know sort of qualify as small town as I define small town witch. One day I was in a waiting room, and a lady came in and she said, They froze my third eye. And then she continued to have a conversation with somebody in the room, and I got stuck on that line. So this is the story, the microfiction that was inspired by a complete stranger whose name I will never know now. It's called Small Town Witch Has Perfect Vision. They froze my third eye, she tells me. She means Ajna chakra, the sight of true seeing, the sight of the divine, taken from her as thoughtlessly as stealing hummingbird nectar. My own well up. Never mind, she says, palming my heart. I don't need eyes to see the light. So that is what you get with a small town witch. Just very short little glimpses, maybe vignettes. Some of them are funny. Some of them are not quite that bizarre. Some of them I hope are inspiring. Um, and I do have links to any time that they've been published. If they're published online, I do put links to them on my website if anybody wants to follow Small Town Witch.
And Deborah, tell us about your website.
www.deborah-adams.com. I've had a website, well, actually back in the 90s, before there was drag and drop, before there was Substack or any of these things, I designed websites. I wrote the code myself. I'm not a computer programmer, but I figured that out. And I've sort of lost interest now. So I'm more than happy to go with these wonderful people who provide drag and drop and make it easy for me. But the website has information about me, information about my books. There is a blog on the site. Usually what I have on the blog is information from either from me or I have guest authors who offer advice to writers, aspiring writers, or to readers who are just interested in knowing how writers operate. And there is a page called Reads. I try to keep it updated with links to any of my stuff that's published online, just in case somebody wants to read it. I have gotten to be, back in the day when I first started as a writer, there was, of course, there was no internet. So there was no online journal. There was none of that stuff. If you were published as a novelist or as a poet, you were published in a print journal.
Mm.
Whole different world where you could submit your packet of poems to one place at a time because simultaneous submissions would get you blacklisted in a hurry. And those 3 poems that you would send out might be gone for a year. And then eventually they would come back all stained and you'd have to retype them because there were no computers, only typewriters. Now that we do have all this wonderful writing available online, most of it free to read, that's sort of it's one of my criteria now for submissions. I prefer to submit to journals that are free to read. Free to read, but of course they aren't free to operate. So anybody who wants to is invited to donate to keep those journals alive. But what I've done with my website then is on the page called Reads, I keep links to my work that is available online, the most recent pieces anyway. I hope that people will, check it out, get an idea of what I write, see if maybe it's something they'd like to read more of.
Do you have an organizational system since you have been writing for a while of all the different places that you have submitted your work and how you keep track of them?
I recently, yes, in the last few years, I have developed a tracking system. I just use a really simple spreadsheet program. Um, but bear in mind that I've been writing and I've been published since the late 1960s. So there was a
That's impressive.
time when I could just remember things and I didn't bother to keep track of it any other way. I was cleaning out a closet recently and discovered that I got a creative writing scholarship at one point that I don't remember.
Yes.
And I found some old journals that my poems have been published in. I'd totally forgotten about those. Anybody who's past a certain age will understand where I'm coming from here. It is important if you're writing this. Pro tip here, folks. Keep track of where you have submitted your work, when, the date you sent it out. Make sure you've got a way to contact the editor of any journals or the agent that you sent it to, because sooner or later your memory's going to go too.
Deborah, would you read some more for us?
A few years ago, I think it was maybe my first time to submit anything to the Poetry Society of Tennessee contest. I submitted this poem, and it did not win. I think it may have gotten an honorable mention, but don't hold me to that. I might be wrong about it. My family has been in West Tennessee since 1700s, late 1600s, early 1700s. But when people hear you from Tennessee, they assume mountains. They assume that I lived next door to Dolly Parton when we were growing up. It's a completely different world in West Tennessee. But my family came through the mountains of East Tennessee to settle in the flatlands of West Tennessee. And even then, they were farmers and they were living fairly isolated lives. Farmers have lots of land that surrounds them, and they just know their immediate neighbors. And of course, there was no internet in the 18th century. So a lot of those Appalachian traditions have come down through my family that I don't even recognize as Appalachian traditions. It's just the way we do things. So that is where this poem began, when I was thinking of all these wonderful Appalachian writers. It seems like there's so many really, really talented writers in that area, and sort of bemoaning the fact that I'm not one of them. Now, this is called Why I'm Not Appalachian. My people came down from those high mountains, dead set on finding a good enough life off to the west, a land where horizons hug the ground and rest easy on the eye, where men can till fields in straight rows, where wide, flat vistas spread out in all directions, where night falls so slow it meets morning light. They brought resources from those high mountains, backbones strong enough to hold the heavens, hands grasping carved stone rules to live by, heads wrapped in bread and bean expectations, hearts content to live with good enough. Life they knew was a rocky slope. You could slide straight to hell if you bore fancy notions. To be safe, they pinched their coins and dreams tight, tamed and leashed. In a land where horizons bear it all, there's no place for illusions to grow or for superstitious moonshine to overshadow common sense. Visions don't bring the crops in, so they lock their eyes on the constant earth, not the fickle sky. Unadorned plains served 8 generations, filled their bellies and kept them satisfied, but my own hunger craves those high mountains from which my people came. Thank you.
And Deborah, that poem is actually published in one of your books.
Yes, and I can't remember whether it's in the Poetry Society anthology that year or not, but
It,
yes,
it, it is, I believe.
it is in there. Okay, and so then it was reprinted, and I should know this. It has been reprinted in patchwork, I'm guessing. Okay,
Yes, it's a beautiful poem.
thank you.
Deborah, I read that you partner with historical societies. Can you elaborate about that? And why is this work so important?
Oh, my blog post this morning talks a bit about that. I wish everybody would record their lives. I wish everybody on earth kept a daily diary of the tiniest little things. There is a book called Nella Last Peace and a sequel called Nella, or a prequel called Nella Last War. Her last name is Last. It's very tricky to say that. But she was keeping her daily record for an archaeology project, an anthropology project during World War II, just prior to and during the war in England. And this is a record of what she had for breakfast, how much knitting she got done, just an ordinary life. But if everybody's ordinary life could come together, we would have such a wonderful, a complete picture of what life was like at any time. And history obviously is something that I enjoy, but I think it's important for everybody to know what life was really like, because it wasn't necessarily what Hollywood tells us the past was like. So in partnering with historical societies, and we have a local history park, what I do is to offer a write your family history workshop in a poem, whether you're a poet or not. And I base it on Georgella Lyon's piece, Where I'm From. If you're not familiar with that poem, just look that up, Georgella Lyon, Where I'm From. It's a simple way to write a poem. You don't have to have any experience as a writer. All you have to do is know a little bit about your family. And then you can write this and you've got a complete record of at least some parts of your life. So that's the best I can do by way of keeping track of history and encouraging other people, since I'm not a history teacher and I'm not a historian by trade or training. But I want very much for people to keep some record of their lives, even if they're not writing it, photographically, draw pictures, scrapbooking, anything. If we can take all of those life stories, put them together, we've got a much better chance of remembering who we were, what we did, what worked, and what didn't.
And you can pass it on down to future
Yes.
generations, especially when maybe you never knew who your grandmother was or your grandfather was, and but you heard their stories, but you couldn't actually maybe see their faces. It would be this sounds like a really great idea.
Well,
Tell, but
you
about the
jump in
people.
there and you jump on this train with me here. Help me get this story to get people to record their stories.
Well, and that's why Briar House Rights exists, is to really provide a legacy, um, an actual way for someone to tell their story in their own words. And hopefully, you know, 50 years from now, when people go back and go, wow, look at Deborah, she was so pretty.
Okay,
but
so
but being able to hear the voice and being able to match it up is just, to me, it's an integral part of what we do here at Briar House Rights, and what I hope most people will do with their own family stories.
good for you. Thank you so much for doing that, Becky.
Deborah, what advice would you give a burgeoning writer or poet that you yourself follow?
The hardest thing in the world, don't take rejection personally. I mean, that's tough.
It is.
I'm much better about it now. I still get a little put out when people don't love every word that I write. But one of the reasons I say that is that I've just had so many years of experience being rejected. And so far, it hasn't really killed me. It sometimes feels like it might, but it hasn't. But also, I have, for 10 years, I was editor of a small press. And almost everything that came to us was very, very good. It wasn't right for us. And so that's what almost all of our rejections meant. And I would say that in the rejection, but as writers, we tend to be a little insecure sometimes. So I know that people's hearts were breaking. The truth is, it was good. It just wasn't right for us. In the past couple of years, I've been an advance reader for a literary journal called Boomerlit. Exactly the same thing. We get so much good writing that comes through, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and most of it isn't right for us. That's the only reason we're turning it down. It is not because it's bad. It's good stuff. It's not right for us. You read the journals, you read books from the publisher, you try to guess what it is that they want, you read their guidelines, but sometimes you just don't, it still just doesn't matter. You just don't quite take it in. And a lot of times those editors can't tell you exactly what they're looking for either. Well, we want something that's really good and we want something that's going to make us all rich, but that's sometimes as specific as it gets. So, best advice I can possibly give is don't take it personally. Put that baby back out there, submit it again, and keep submitting it. If you believe in your piece, keep submitting it until it finds the home where it needs to be.
Deborah, when you talk about, we talked about workshops prior. Um, how important are workshops to a writer?
There are probably some writers who don't need them at all. I love workshops. You and I were at Poetry Society of Tennessee recently. Fantastic workshops. I'll talk specifically about the one that Christian Collier did because I'm sure you were there too. As he started that out, at first, my first thought, I wish all your viewers could have been there. He had us begin by making a list, just a very simple list. And I thought, oh, good, because I haven't had much coffee and I can make a list. That's nice. And then he had us do another fairly simple little exercise, and I thought that was nice. And I was still not feeling any pressure. And then when he said, now put this name where you currently have this word. And I thought that was the most brilliant thing I'd ever heard. It opened up a whole new way for me to approach writing. That's why I think workshops are so important because we do, as he pointed out, we all get into ruts. We tend to do the same thing over and over again. And I have, in those times when I've tried to write every day, what happens is it gets to be drudgery, and I am writing the same thing every day. It's so dull, it's so boring. So I need a little shake up. Workshops do that for me.
Thank you so much for spending time with us today at Briar House Writes. And I really wish you all the best in your writing future.
Thank you for making time for me. I know you probably got a ton of authors who are lined up waiting to get on here. So it's really, really nice. I'm absolutely flattered and honored that you invited me. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.